So we're back with more aviation and whatever else comes out of it. Paul Brennan here in Wellington.
And Martin Noakes, also in Wellington.
Okay, and the clip that we're looking at the moment, Martin, for those watching the YouTube version, the old A300 Airbus. These shots are from Perth, by the way.
Ah, yeah. Went into service 40 years ago this month.
We're going to be talking about that a bit later on in the program, and we'll have a bit of footage for those, again, watching the video version of the first flight of that aircraft. The first big twin would be the best way to describe it, wouldn't it?
It was, and it was massive.
And look how history has resolved that argument.
Absolutely.
Plenty of other things to talk about. Back to MH370.
Unfortunately, not much to talk about there.
No, still missing.
Well, still haven't found it. Malaysian Airlines have released all the radar data to the public, so if anyone, amateur sleuths out there, would like to take a look at it, you can go and get it.
Yeah. Is that sort of what they're hoping will happen now?
I think they just want to prove that there's no sneaky business going on.
Yeah.
And the undersea search has recommenced.
Yeah, I see a company has made available a new graphic representation of the seafloor in that area. The topography there, gosh, it's 7,800 meters at its deepest point, with mountains that are 5,000 feet off the surface. Be difficult to find something in there quickly.
5,000 meters. So there's a
5,000 meters. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a 5,000 meter valleys, and even the top of the mountain's still 2,000 meters under the sea.
It's not just an abyssal plain.
No.
So maybe that explains why there were issues with receiving pings, from the identifier underwater.
Yeah.
Consistently, stuff like that, because we've talked about those things.
Yeah.
Boy, vanishing is the word. It's just vanished. No wreckage, nothing. Not an iota.
No, gone.
Oh dear. Okay, so not much more to say about that at this stage.
Nothing.
Though it does seem that, like you've mentioned, the Malaysian government sort of tried to show that it actually wasn't holding anything back or not telling the truth. And I think it's been pretty well accepted that the crew involved with the flight and the passengers, really no suspicion directly on them.
No.
So that's where it's at. All right, first story. We stay close to home. First up, I see the delivery of the 787-9 for Air New Zealand, end of June. And also got a new 777-300 ER coming in that time as well, next month. So quite a bit of activity for the old airline.
Nice.
Yeah. Got to say that black tail with the fern does sort of work on the 777 because of its length.
Yes. Yeah, the size. Yeah, I agree. Still a bit commercially, though, but...
Yeah, well, we know that.
Yeah, we've been there.
It's a bit rugby.
Yeah.
And, of course, the all-black 787-9 is going to be here, and I see that they're going to be using that to Shanghai, which isn't performing too well.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because there were such high hopes placed on the whole Chinese market, and it just seems not to have happened. There's
talk about inconsistent product between the 76s and the 777s. Obviously, the Chinese don't like that sort of inconsistency.
Well, who would? Especially if they substitute a plane. Like, you think you get in on a 777 with lie-flat seats, and you get to the airport, and you found you're on an old 767 with reclining seats.
And possibly for a higher fare than China Southern.
Well, I'm pretty sure they'd sort you out somehow, but still, it's not very nice.
And you're flying on a brand new plane.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've got to match that product.
Yes. And they will. Once they got the 789, it'll be a better plane than the China Southern, which is only a 788.
It's got a higher number.
Yeah.
It must be better. The thing is, though, will the Chinese like to stick with a carrier from their own country no matter what?
Well, there's always that, isn't there?
But they got so many people in that market. There should be a bit for everybody.
Yes, but there'll be airline alliances. That'll play a role because China Southern's not in the Star Alliance.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think for the same reason that Kiwis like to fly in New Zealand, I'm pretty sure a lot of Chinese prefer to fly with a Chinese airline.
Well, there you go. So maybe it's a difficult fight to be in.
I think it might well be.
Yeah, so what do you do?
Indeed, what do you do? Well, they're trying to cut costs by putting on a more efficient plane. It'll be a lot more efficient than both the 76 and the 777, and I guess they'll see how they'll go.
Yeah, she'll be right.
You hope so.
We talk about Qantas a lot. Is it true that they're talking about getting rid of a whole bunch of pilots now?
Dozens. The reports say dozens, and then a bit further down they say about 100, which is 20% of the 550 pilots, or roughly 20% of the 550 pilots in the 767 and 747 fleets, which they were retiring slightly quicker than initially anticipated.
Right. What are they doing? Offering them redundancy?
Yeah, it'd be packages.
Yeah?
Yeah.
They'd probably get jobs elsewhere. A lot of them, though, would be older types, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so whether or not they're qualified to fly another aircraft or whether or not they want to undertake the training to go and fly more modern planes remains to be seen. I think anybody over a certain age, probably quite a low age, will be offered a relatively lucrative package to leave.
Yeah, because there's a shrinking number of 747s and 767s in the world.
So the pilots will go, and then pretty soon after that all the maintenance staff will go, and pretty soon after that they'll probably close a maintenance base wherever it is for those planes.
What about the ownership rules? We've talked about those from time to time. And,
yeah, the 49%.
Also, we know that the Australian government is not averse to, slash and burn if it has to, judging by the latest budget. So where's that at?
They have relaxed the rules, and that has gone to the lower house, and they're waiting for approval by the upper house, which would then let foreign investments in, but I don't know who'd want to invest.
Speaking of investing, we had the Trends conference here a couple of weeks ago. That's where the tourism people get together and tell each other they're doing a great job. But it's also an opportunity to do some business. And I see that, the people from Denver Airport were down here trying to persuade Air New Zealand to fly direct to Denver. Maybe that's not such a silly idea.
It is not such a silly idea. If you're a Kiwi going to the States onward, going to New York or somewhere like that, going through Denver is just as good as going through any of the other airports, if not better.
If you're into a bit of skiing, you go and do a bit of skiing for a few days and then carry on.
Exactly, and it'll be a lot less hectic than going through LAX.
And isn't United huge in Denver? It's one of their big hubs, isn't it?
It's a big
hub,
hub,
you can go anywhere from there pretty well.
Yeah. No, it'd be a great way to go to the States. Stop off in Denver, spend a night there, and then take a shorter flight to the East Coast. Because it'll be a couple of hours less than via LAX.
Yeah, why do people prefer to go through Los Angeles? It's not a great experience, really.
Well, we've discussed this before.
A lot of people, I guess, go to California, do they, and visit there or holiday there?
I guess. I mean, the movie industry, of anybody involved in the movie industry,
Disneyland,
or the defense industry, there is obviously a great reason to go to LAX. But if you're on your way to Miami or New York or Chicago or somewhere, just as good flying through Denver, if not better. I mean, we've discussed this before. We've often wondered why there wasn't a flight to Las Vegas.
Exactly, and there are plenty of cities in the world that fly to Las Vegas.
Yeah, BA.
Out of Europe, out of UK,
and an awful lot of the people I speak to are going to the States. They often go to Vegas, so wouldn't that be an option?
Why not go direct there?
Yeah.
Because there are no range issues. Las Vegas is only, an extra 40 minutes flying time or even less.
Yeah. I mean,
as the crow flies, as they say.
We've thought it would make sense, but kind of hope the Denver thing happens. I'd use it. Speaking
of the US there, wasn't it funny? You go back 3 or 4 years, and if anyone ever raised any issue about American Airlines buying Airbus aircraft, they'd say, oh no, there's no way, they can't polish the fuselage, they only like metal fuselages. Well, they dealt to that one a few years ago by repainting all the planes. Now they're going Airbus nuts.
They are, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah, they're and going nuts for the A321, which I'm kind of surprised because I thought they were going to be big A320 users, but it looks like they're upscaling a lot of their orders from A320 to A321.
And I think US Air, who they've merged with, also had some outstanding A320 orders. They've also converted to A321. So I think they'll end up operating close to 100 A321s by the time the dust settles on just the current orders.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, forget US Air, but American Airlines, they were held up as the American of American carriers.
American Airlines,
And, they had those A300s, of course, about 30 of them.
Yeah.
And
which they used in the Caribbean and near South America.
That's right.
Yeah.
And retired. I think they retired them because of their crash had a bit to do with it, didn't it? The perception of them, whatever. But here they are, big time back into it, and it's this A321. So, and I see that now you see A322 being talked about.
Yes. Yeah, slightly longer
Even
wings,
more.
Another 40 people.
And the story about the geared turbofan, Pratt & Whitney's geared turbofan, going to a new limit of thrust.
Yes, and it turns out those engines under testing have proven to be more efficient than initially anticipated. And with a small software change, they took the thrust up another 3,000 pounds to 35,000 pound thrust. And they're that confident they've offered it as a standard model.
Which is great for the aircraft because it either means extra load or extra fuel.
Yeah.
And extra range.
Yep.
Or extra economics. And what they're saying is that there are basically 60 extra seats in the A321 over the A320 for between 10 and 15% extra operating cost. So you actually do pretty well out of it.
And American Airlines have been quite clever, or innovative perhaps, in the American market, in as much as they've basically used the A321 to launch are like an executive express from the east coast to the west coast. So
Yeah.
they're business class configured planes with lie-flat seats and the whole thing.
Half the plane is that, isn't it?
Yeah,
And the other half's just the regular seats.
yeah.
But obviously there is premium traffic, business traffic between the east and the west
Between the
coast, and
coasts, yeah.
vice versa. It's obvious, isn't it?
And it seems to be a very popular service.
Yeah, and that'd be a premium seat, wouldn't it?
I've often wondered why Air New Zealand didn't take A321s for the Trans-Tasman.
Maybe they will still.
Possibly.
Yeah. I see the recently the third domestic A320 arrived with the Sharklets.
Yep.
The third one with the Sharklets. They look pretty cool as
It's
well.
a nice looking plane.
Yeah, yeah. So things change pretty quickly, don't they?
Very quickly.
Because of course Air New Zealand used to be a Boeing.
Well, before that they were Douglas.
Well, they were Douglas, but then they seriously went Boeing.
They did.
And they're very loyal.
Well, I remember the people talking about it up to not long before they placed the A320 order that Air New Zealand would never fly Airbus A320s because the aileron deflection was not enough to provide safe crosswind handling. Now they're going into Wellington every day, and they seem to be going in quite
Well,
safely.
you wouldn't get certified if that was the
No,
case.
exactly.
I mean, it's crazy stuff.
But people were sort of, no, never.
Another A380 ramp incident. There's been quite a few.
Yeah.
This time it's Sydney. It's a Singapore Airlines one. The last few days or so bumped the engine nacelle into a piece of structure. I mean, you're dealing with a big piece of machinery there. I suppose things.
It's happened a few times in
go
Toronto
wrong.
as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, they've sort of banged them up.
Yeah.
Well, they call that ramp rash or whatever.
Yeah, that was, but that pole went quite deeply into that engine nacelle in Sydney. Must have hit it
Yeah, I wonder how much strain that puts on the
pylon.
pylon.
Yeah.
There'd be a lot of strength in it, though, I would
Yes.
imagine. That possibly is an entirely new engine,
They can replace that lip,
or just the front bit.
but it's all riveted. So A380s are operated by Qantas, so maybe they got the bits there.
They have roller engines on the Singapore ones as well, do they?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, well, they probably did.
yeah.
They could just sort of phone them up. Mate!
Yeah, mate.
That reminds me of the story that the guy set up Kiwi Air, the Hamilton guy. And he had a brake lock up on their 727 that they had at Sydney. And the Qantas guys offered to tow him off the runway because he was blocking the runway.
Yeah.
He said, look, that's wonderful, thanks. We'll take up your offer. So they came along and dragged the thing off, just off the runway onto a taxiway, and then disconnected and left him.
Left him there.
You know, they weren't really interested in helping him. They just wanted him out of the way so their planes could land. Yeah, Ewan Wilson was the guy's name. And the book is called Dogfight. It's quite an interesting book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a basic book, but it's an interesting story. But, you know, those Aussies can be pretty brutal sometimes. Anyway.
In terms of air shows, at the moment we've got the Internationale Luftfahrtsausstellung in Berlin, the ILA.
Yeah, I saw
which
that.
is a big air show.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Yep.
And not much coming out of it. Lots of stuff about drones, which
Oh, okay.
must admit, drones.
Well, that's where it's sort of
That
at the moment,
seems to be
isn't
where
it?
it's at.
Yeah.
Emirates, they're still wrapped with their A380s.
Right.
You know, they've been running them now for 7 years,
Yep.
and they consider it a magnet aircraft in terms of customers. They say if they upscale from a 777 and put A380s on their route, they get more people.
Oh, okay. So they actually grow their market.
They actually grow their market by putting an A380 on it because the product is perceived by the customer to be better across all classes.
And that must affect whoever they're competing with.
Absolutely.
They'd live in dread of that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would. They would.
Yeah.
And it'll all come down to the quietness. And I'm pretty sure the 787 will also be similar. But, of course, there is also something grand about this massive airplane, which is incredibly quiet and incredibly comfortable. Whereas the 787, it's a really nice-looking plane, and it'll be just as quiet. But it doesn't have that sort of, you know, you're now on the biggest plane in the world type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And people see footage and they hear people talk about it. And
Yeah. You just wonder if they do the upgrade, and Airbus is apparently seriously considering the A380neo, how many Tim Clark says he will order, another maybe 50, but you wonder how many they'll end up operating if it all works out.
Well, there must be a limit.
You'd think so.
Yeah. Though,
there'd have to be.
Are they aiming to have one available, a service available for every major city they serve?
That looks like the way it's going.
And I think you need about 3, don't you, to
Yeah.
reliably maintain a regular service?
Yes. So if there's
Daily service or whatever? Yeah.
So if they're servicing 100 cities.
Oh, they got a ways to go yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it's still working for them.
Absolutely, yeah. They are very, very happy.
What else was at that air show? I see that the Airbus had their A400 Grizzly in French Air Force colours.
Yeah,
Is that the first one to go to France?
It's actually in service. The Grizzly is already in limited service with the French Air Force.
Gosh, that looks like a sharp plane.
It's a great looking plane, isn't it?
Expensive though.
Very expensive.
We couldn't afford it.
No, very capable, but very expensive. But there is a plane New Zealand could afford.
Oh, okay. Was that there being showcased there as well?
No, its first flight sometime this year, later this year. But it's gone from initial planning to proposed first flight this year very, very quickly. And that's a plane being built by Embraer down in Brazil, those Brazilians, eh?
Yeah.
The tanker version's called the KC-390.
Right.
And it's basically a twin-engine, jet-powered Hercules replacement, which somehow costs about $20 million less than a Hercules.
I'm reminded of that Japanese transporter that was made in the 70s, the Kawasaki.
The C1 or the K1.
K1, yeah. And it's got JT8 turbofans like the 7.3s and the 7.2s had hanging off the wings.
Plane.
Is it in that sort of size, that class? Is
Not quite as Thunderbirdsy looking as the Japanese version, but still pretty good looking. So it's a high wing, T-tail. It looks like a miniature twin-engine C-17. Can carry 20 tons for 1,500 miles or 15 tons for 2,500 miles type of thing.
Oh, it's not bad. So it's a direct competitor with the C-130.
Basically, it's a direct C-130 replacement.
Yeah.
Yeah. But faster, higher, can run on unimproved strips, all that type of thing.
Be fly-by-wire and the whole nine yards, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And, of course, they're so experienced now with what they've been doing that you can pretty well rely on.
Yeah, they're a major aircraft manufacturer.
Yeah, big time.
And they've sold a bunch of these already to various air forces around South America. The Czechs are taking some, the Portuguese are taking some, and it's garnering a lot of interest.
Maybe we should be looking at them.
Well, or you could just continue pumping millions into the old Hercs.
But you need something that's fast. You need something with the reliability of being modern and definitely fly-by-wire, no matter how you do up those old planes. You're never going to get into that. And also the capability to deploy, without having to find spare parts and make sure everything's, because we've had a reliability issue for a long time.
That should be gone now, though, with the update, though.
Well,
right?
It's still old machines, though. You see?
Yeah, I suppose.
I guess it's better than it was. But also, it's got to look good too, You've got to look like you're serious, right?
Well, and this Embraer looks real nice.
Yeah. And in a foreign relations sort of a way, it gives us a good business footing with Brazil.
Well, look what Qatar did as well by painting up their C-17s in Qatari colours.
That's right, yeah.
It's quite a...
Still the Air Force operating it, though.
Yeah, it sends quite a message.
When you're coming to the aid of people, you want to look like you've got the gear.
Yeah.
To inspire the confidence.
Yeah.
And that around the Pacific would be brilliant.
Yes. And probably, this is something we've discussed not on the air before, but something we have discussed. If you had some sort of joint Australia-New Zealand thing going there, they could get to use the little ones, and every now and again New Zealand could get to use a C-17.
There you go.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I believe that, because we're talking about the KC-390 version, tanker version, it gives you the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. You've got your transporter, and then you can fly them quite a long way because you've also got the same aircraft that's a tanker.
Yeah.
So you can really multiply the mission, We can't do that.
No.
And you get to the ice with your 15 tons?
You get your 15 tons down to the ice at jet speeds.
Yeah, there you go.
36,000 feet, Mach 0.8.
And presumably, if you've got a tanker being made, there'll be opportunities to put supplemental fuel in and, mixed payload of extra fuel and payload to go further. And we should be looking at this. We should be one of the early partners.
Yeah. If New Zealand was in the market for a plane like that, you'd hope that they'd be looking at that type
But that'd
of
be
thing.
the one.
Yep, pretty much.
How much are they?
About $55 million.
US.
US.
It's not bad.
Well, apparently it's about $20 million cheaper than a new Herc.
Well, I wonder how much it costs to do up our current Hercs.
Quite a lot.
Probably buy 2 or 3 of those for even the price of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's the KC-390 Embraer, and there'll be all just cargo version, obviously, as well.
Yeah, and para-dropping and all this type of thing. So it's a little tactical airlifter.
And for those who've just been watching the YouTube version, you would have seen some of the pictures that are supplied by Embraer supporting that product. When does it first fly?
Later this year.
Well, we see that they're assembling it now.
Yeah.
They're putting together the bits now. 40 years ago it was that the Airbus A300 entered airline service with Air France. It's our airplane of the day, and really was the I guess, culmination of all the work done by the British and French civil aircraft builders coming together.
Yep.
Which has set the tone for everything that's come and Airbus as it is today. So a visionary move back in those days.
It was a visionary move. It was a difficult berth, though. The plane that entered service was called the A300B because the initial A300, the A model, was meant to seat 300, which would have been very visionary. But at the time, Rolls-Royce had money problems and the British government didn't want to give them too much more money. And so Rolls-Royce didn't develop the engine that would have been required for it. Subsequently, they did go on to develop the engine, but by then it was too late.
I think it first flew and went into service with a GE the
engine.
CF6.
So they downscaled it to make the A300B, made a 250-seater, and put the GE engine on it.
Yeah. The visionary piece really was going for that whole big twin idea.
Absolutely.
Because up to that point you had, TriStar and DC-10, the Tri-Jets.
Yes.
And they were talking about twin-engine versions of
They
those.
were talking about it.
They never actually got to it.
And it was based on a requirement from an unofficial requirement voiced by an American Airlines executive, actually, at the time, saying that for internal American flights, a big twin would be absolutely ideal. And the only one that took them up was Airbus, because they were looking for something to get into, because the others were quite happy selling their Tri-Jets.
Yeah, and you'd have to compete in a well-worn market for your competitors. So, yeah, you might as well start with a new idea.
Airbus saw the opportunity. They formed the consortium. The British government, of course, dropped out, but Hawker Siddeley kept making the wings. They stayed in, privately funded themselves to stay in, which is why all Airbus wings today are built in Wales.
There you go.
Yep. And they went and made this plane, and it went on to be... It was a difficult berth. Sales weren't great initially, but they went on to sell nearly 600.
I know. And the interesting thing is it wasn't that long ago that they were rolling the last ones out. They were freighters, I believe.
Yeah, FedEx.
They would have been in the mid-2000s.
Yeah.
So that had a real long production line.
Real long production line. And of course the fuselage went on. It's still the same fuselage used in the A330s and A3600s today.
So
more or less.
The first version had a flight engineer, didn't it?
Yes.
And I think the B2...
B2 was they called it forward-facing crew.
And did
Two
they
pilots.
Okay, but analog.
Analog.
And then 310 came along.
310 came along. That had little CRT tubes. That was a little bit electronic flight deck.
And that gave birth to the 600.
The 600 and the 605s, which were quite a lot more advanced. So they had the A310 cockpit slightly updated.
Yeah.
They had the A310 tail, which was a supercritical tail design on the
composite?
back.
I think it was composite.
Composite, yes.
Fly-by-wire.
Fly-by-wire tail.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, because I grew up in South Africa, and we would be flying around on 7.3s and 7.2s, and I remember when the A300, there was a special model made for South Africa. It was the A300B2K.
Yep.
And it had a slightly heavier weight, so it was about 7 tons heavier, so it was 165 tons or whatever. And it had Kruger flaps for the hot and high. And I remember as a kid walking out onto the apron at Louis Botha Airport. They didn't have jet bridges. You had to walk upstairs. And I just remember this thing was vast. And then I got into it. I was, I don't know how old I was, about 10. And I remember us flying over the Free State, over the Drakensberg, and the plane wasn't that full, and I was able to run from side to side of the plane and look out of the windows.
Yep.
And it was just so big compared to anything else I'd flown in.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. They made it really big.
It was really big.
Really wide, and had a huge cargo capacity.
Yeah.
For its time as well.
And I remember the cabin being really high, I just thought, geez, this is really, really airy.
Yeah. I remember the A300B2 prototype in Airbus colours, Martin, coming to New Zealand in 1974. In fact, here you go, this week back in 1974, on display to NAC, the local airline at the time. And I think they were also trying to interest maybe Air New Zealand in trans-Tasman operations for this aircraft. But I remember flying over Wellington, and you could see the orange livery of Airbus on it,
Would have been too much plane for New Zealand in those days, eh?
I think so, yeah. Maybe not for Air New Zealand. Of course, they went on to get the 767 about 8 or 9 years later to order that. But that's how far ahead of its time it was.
It was very far ahead of its time. And I flew in the early South African ones, and when I was living in Europe, or I was actually living in the States, but I used to go back to Europe to the head office every now and again, and I flew Swiss Air, but they had a code-sharing agreement with Austrian Airlines, and we used to go Zurich, Washington, D.C. in an A310.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the A310...
which was the shorter, longer
range
version.
That was only the 200, was it? The 300 had the first one with the wing fences on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what we see is, like you made the point, that the fuselage is really still around in the A330 being built, A340 of course, but I think that's out of production now. It's created the platform for the A350, A380.
Pretty much.
Certainly the whole electronic cockpit and everything was pioneered on that 600 A300, wasn't it?
That was quite an advanced plane, the 600 and the 605. The biggest operator at the moment is FedEx. They've got 90 in operation and 48 in storage. Most of the stored items are A310s.
Yeah, well, you can see why, because they'd have less capacity, wouldn't they? And also, United Parcel Service has a whole bunch too.
Yes, yeah, it's turned out to be a very, very popular plane in America. The production method they use for that's the same one they use for the A380. So, so they're trucking stuff around Europe, barges across the ocean, blah, blah, blah. So they built it all over Europe, brought it to Toulouse, assembled it there, and then flew it out of there.
Yeah. The closest operator to this part of the world would have been TAA, becoming Australian Airlines in Australia.
How long do they have them for?
Well over a decade. So, 40 years this past few weeks, the anniversary of the Airbus A300 wide-bodied twin going into airline service. There you go. And next week we'll have another aircraft to mention. Before we go, it doesn't have to be made of metal. As long as it flies, it interests me. Did you see that article about bats' wings?
Yes.
I've always wondered about bats because they don't really have an aerodynamic wing as such. It's a membrane.
Yeah.
And you wonder where the flying shape comes from. But there is actually a flying shape, and that is on the downbeat, hair width muscles, which cover the entire surface of the skin areas of the wing, the membrane areas of the wing, stiffen and create a wing shape.
Okay.
Amazing.
It is amazing, because apparently bats, despite their relatively low muscle mass when compared to birds, are actually more efficient than birds at flying, given the fact they don't have as much muscle.
Yeah.
And like those flying foxes cover enormous distances very effectively.
Yeah. Well, at nano time, they are tweaking every area of their wing into a particular shape.
The optimum shape.
Through these very fine hair width muscles. There's a huge network of them over their wing.
When you watch slow motion videos of bats flying, it's just incredible, isn't it? How those little joints and those spindly little bones are just constantly moving.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the reason I mention this is because inevitably you're going to start seeing this sort of ability to manipulate small areas in a global space, let's say over a whole wing, to
constantly variable wing surfaces,
to absolutely high precision, and I'm picking massive efficiency gains.
Yeah.
This was found out by some scientist putting little measuring devices all over the wing.
Oh, yeah.
And measuring the tautness and the stretch of those muscles.
So maybe we'll have a bat's wing plane hanging upside down in the hangar. Yeah.
So you've been watching too many movies,
I guess.
We're out of time again. Another 2 weeks has flown past. We won't even bother mentioning that we probably won't be finding MH370 this time next fortnight. We won't even mention that. There'll be plenty more to talk about. Until then, Paul Brennan in Wellington. See you around.
Yeah, and Martin Noakes. See you around.